I have long suspected that the door of heaven is fitted with a key both embarrassingly small and strangely light. The learned hand reaches for a complicated instrument and fumbles. The powerful hand brings a battering ram and bruises itself, but the child stretches out a palm, empty but expectant, and the lock yields. This is not because ignorance is better than wisdom or weakness nobler than strength, but because heaven's entrance was never designed for clenched fists. We come into the world wailing and gripping. We enter the kingdom by releasing. The paradox offends our adult ambitions. We prefer ledgers to lullabies, strategies to songs, and we imagine that God is impressed by our height. Yet the sky itself is reached not by ladders, but by openness, as a window receives the morning. If the heart would behold glory, it must lay down its pretense, unlearn its stiffness, and recover the perilous innocence that trusts before it calculates. When I speak of the childlike heart, I do not mean a flight back into the nursery, nor a refusal of the hard school of reason. The mind God gave us is not to be parked outside the chapel like muddy boots before entering. Rather, childlikeness is the posture of reason when it remembers it is a creature. It is the intellect kneeling to drink at a spring deeper than itself, the imagination standing on tiptoe to see over the hedgerow of the world. Far from being a withdrawal from reality, it is the admission ticket to reality's deepest strata. Consider how we spoil our vision by confusing childishness with childlikeness. Childishness demands sweetmeats and refuses vegetables. Childlikeness gives thanks for bread and marvels that ordinary wheat, stalks bending in an obedient wind, can become nourishment. Childishness refuses to wait. Childlikeness knows that waiting is the secret choreography of gifts. The one sulks in a corner when the universe will not revolve around its whim. The other discovers that the universe has been humming a tune all along and learns the steps. We moderns have been trained to distrust wonder, as if amazement were a breach of intellectual hygiene. We are told to grow up, by which is meant, stop kneeling, stop exclaiming, put away your stars and shells and snowflakes, and take instead this clipboard. But wonder is not a retreat from truth. It is what truth requires in the presence of splendor. Show me a man who cannot be surprised, and I will show you a man who has mislaid his soul. A child gasps because the world has not become normal yet. A saint gasps because it never should. There is also humility. Children have no elaborate biographies to defend. They are not yet busy curating a museum of self-importance. They can say, quite simply, I am small, and in that admission lies the spaciousness into which God can enter. Pride is a swollen thing. It makes the heart too cramped for the Almighty. A child's humility is not humiliation. It is the joyful exactness of scale. The ocean does not resent the littleness of the shell that receives it. The shell resents nothing at all, and so it is filled. Faith, too, is childlike. Not because it is blind, but because it is relational. The child trusts the Father not by solving him like a theorem, but by knowing him as a presence. Indeed, the highest arguments of philosophy are like well-built bridges. They can carry us across the chasm of confusion, but they deposit us on a meadow where trust and love are still required. The childlike heart walks that meadow with a hand in another's, accepting that guidance is a greater safety than self-direction. Joy follows upon this trust as music follows the tuning of an instrument. Joy is not a luxury. It is the native air of a heart aligned with reality. Children know how to receive delight without the self-consciousness that dissects it on arrival. Adults often dissect their joys so thoroughly that nothing living remains on the table. We fear to be fooled by happiness and are, in the end, fooled into misery. The childlike do not worship pleasure. They simply let it pass through them toward the giver, as sunlight passes through stained glass and becomes a pattern of praise. Suffering, too, is transfigured by childlikeness. I do not say that pain is minimized, as if hurt were a toy. A child's tears are honest, but the child who climbs into a father's lap does not thereby solve the storm. He relocates within it. The greatest spiritual secret is not the acquisition of control, but the discovery of proximity. To be near love is to endure differently. We carry our crosses not as solitary engineers of fate, but as sons and daughters who have heard a voice promise, "I am with you." Thus, even in the valley, there can be a shy, invincible courage. Hope is the forward-leaning aspect of this same heart. The child believes that tomorrow can be better because goodness is not yet exhausted. The cupboards of God are deeper than our appetites. We adults, having tasted the bitterness of broken promises, are tempted to make cynicism our armor. But cynicism is not armor. It is mildew on the soul. It protects from nothing and stains everything. Hope, by contrast, is a window flung open toward a country we have not yet visited and yet somehow remember. We are, all of us, homesick for a place we have only glimpsed in moments. When the light lifted, when forgiveness arrived, when the music said more than notes can say. Childlike hearts do not deny this homesickness, they follow it like a star. What then of heaven? If heaven belongs to the childlike, it is because heaven is the land where receptivity becomes our native habit. There, everything is gift. If you insist on owning, you will have nothing. If you consent to receive, you will inherit all. The first lesson of paradise is not how to manage abundance, but how to be unembarrassed by being loved. The blessed are not great managers of divine capital, they are poor in spirit and therefore infinitely rich. In that country, the wise are those who have learned the alphabet of praise. R for Abba, B for blessed be your name, and so on into an eternity of astonishment. How then shall we practice this childlikeness here? Begin with gratitude, that primer of the soul. Name your gifts before breakfast. Attend to small beauties, the steam rising from the cup, the robin's arithmetic upon the lawn, the page that receives your pen. Then ask, for children ask. Prayer is the audacity of dependence. Learn obedience, not a servile crouch, but a noble readiness to be taught. Keep holy curiosity. Let your questions be ladders, not ladders kicked away. And finally, forgive quickly. Children do not make grudges into monuments. They let the sandcastle fall and build another. If you will risk this simplicity, you will find that the world grows young again, not because it has changed, but because you have. And then the key, small and light, will not be lost. The childlike heart, when allowed to grow in grace, begins to glimpse the divine arithmetic of loss and gain. The world tells us that maturity is measured by accumulation, possessions, accomplishments, titles, and applause. But Christ reverses the equation. Whoever loses his life for my sake shall find it. The paradox is perfectly suited to children, for they are expert at the art of losing. They lose their toys and forget them. They lose today and are already absorbed in tomorrow's game. They lose the score of yesterday's quarrel and are friends again before supper. The adult, however, clutches tightly. He hoards his wounds as if they were currency, defends his position as if eternity depended upon it, and locks his grudges in a vault. But in the kingdom, what is kept is lost, and what is yielded is gathered into glory. This is why forgiveness, so costly to the adult, comes so naturally to the child. A little one may scream in anger at noon, and by 3 o'clock he is offering half a biscuit to the very companion who provoked his wrath. There is no ledger kept, no running total of debts. The childlike heart is merciful because it has not yet learned the bitterness of bookkeeping. And this is precisely the quality heaven demands. For in heaven we will live forever with forgiven sinners. Imagine what an unending eternity would be if grudges were imported. Only those who have become as children, those who forgive with the speed of play, will find heaven habitable. Moreover, the childlike heart is unashamed of dependence. Adults dread it. We disguise our needs, conceal our weaknesses, and would rather starve than admit hunger. But a child will simply announce, "I am hungry. I am tired. Carry me." And this candor is a form of truthfulness, the only atmosphere in which grace can breathe. For God resists the proud but gives grace to the lowly. The child does not imagine himself self-sufficient. He does not even desire such independence. He longs to be carried, to be provided for, to be guided. And what is salvation but precisely this? Being carried by Christ into the Father's house. Notice also how the imagination of a child is tuned toward a transcendence. Give him a cardboard box, and he has a castle, a stick, and he wields a sword, the night sky, and he is voyaging among stars. He is not embarrassed to see beyond appearances. Adults, on the other hand, are trained to reduce. A box is merely packaging, a stick mere wood, the sky merely gas and gravity. We strip away the poetry and call it realism, when in truth it is impoverishment. The child is nearer to the truth, for creation is not bare mechanism, but living symbol. Every river is secretly an echo of the water of life, every seed a hint of resurrection, every sunrise a whisper of the final dawn. The child's imagination does not invent fantasy, but receives parables that reality itself is always telling. In this sense, becoming childlike is not regression, but progression. It is not a refusal to grow, but the very form of growth demanded by eternity. For eternity is not a school where we are tested, nor a factory where we are measured, but a feast where we are welcomed. And who are more suited to feasts than children? They arrive with eyes wide, hands eager, laughter unpracticed, and joy unembarrassed. They do not analyze the menu or measure the plates. They simply eat and are glad. So with heaven, it is the table set for those who are not too proud to sit down. What of those who resist this childlikeness? They will find, tragically, that their adulthood has aged them out of joy. They will enter eternity with clenched teeth, demanding wages rather than gifts. But God has no wages to pay, only gifts to bestow. Heaven is not an office, it is a garden. Not a contract, but a covenant. Not a reward, but a restoration. And only the childlike will be at home there. Therefore, the great task of life is not to outgrow our need of God, but to grow back into it consciously, for the infant depends without knowing. The childlike saint depends with full awareness and with joy. To pass through maturity and return to childlike trust is the journey of sanctification. It is to be taught by wisdom and yet not lose wonder, to carry sorrow and yet not forfeit laughter, to confront mortality and yet believe in immortality. And here lies the final irony. In order to grow up in Christ, one must grow down into humility, into trust, into that simple delight that can see in a daisy the handwriting of God. To the world, this is folly. To heaven, it is citizenship. The passport is written not in ink, but in innocence restored by grace. And so, my friends, if you would enter the kingdom, you must become small, not foolish, but free, not naive, but trusting, not childish, but childlike. For in the end, all crowns are cast down, and all wisdom is silenced until only love remains, and love, like laughter, is the province of the child. If we press yet deeper, we discover that the childlike heart is not only a moral posture, but also a theological revelation. For what is God, if not eternally Father? And if He is Father, then we must be children. Heaven is not a kingdom of independent sovereigns, each enthroned in his own fortress, but a household, large beyond measure, but still a household, where the one eternal Father gathers His sons and daughters. To be childlike, then, is not simply to imitate innocence. It is to align ourselves with the very structure of reality. Pride is the great fiction, the attempt to live as one who is not a child. Humility is the great realism, the acknowledgement of what we have been from the beginning and what we shall be forever. The Lord Himself embodied this mystery. Think of Christ, who could calm storms and summon angels, yet chose to dwell as the carpenter's son, dependent on Mary's embrace, learning letters at Joseph's knee. The Incarnation is the ultimate declaration that God honors childlikeness. He does not disdain weakness, but enters it. He does not merely bless the cradle, he takes one for his own. In Bethlehem, we see omnipotence wrapped in swaddling clothes. In Gethsemane, we hear the eternal Son addressing his Father with the words of a child, Abba. If the Son of God himself is not ashamed of childlike dependence, how can we call it immaturity? Let us, then, compare two portraits, the proud adult and the childlike saint. The adult strides into the room of life, carrying heavy trunks, full of credentials, arguments, achievements, and grievances. He places them in a proud tower about himself and waits to be admired. The childlike saint enters with empty hands. His possessions are laughter, a quick forgiveness, and an unguarded trust. Now ask, which is nearer to heaven? Which will more readily kneel when the great feast is announced? Which will recognize the Father's voice when it calls? The childlike heart also understands play, that strange and holy activity in which joy is pursued for its own sake. We, who are grown, often forget how to play. We must justify everything as productive, profitable, or practical. But heaven, I am convinced, is nearer to play than to profit. For creation itself is an overflow of divine joy, not a business contract. The galaxies were not necessary. They were delighted into being. The rivers do not earn wages for their flowing. They run because water loves to move. The childlike heart participates in this divine play, whether by singing, imagining, or simply reveling in the sheer existence of things. And such play is no frivolity. It is a prophecy of the joy to come. Yet let no one mistake this childlikeness for weakness of will. On the contrary, it demands a strength rarer than iron. To entrust oneself to God requires more courage than to seize control. To forgive an enemy requires more mettle than to nurse a grudge. To rejoice in the midst of sorrow demands more resilience than to surrender to despair. The childlike heart is not a fragile toy. It is a mighty paradox, soft in hand, unbreakable in spirit. Here lies, I think, one of the profoundest truths. Childlikeness is not natural to the adult heart. We do not drift into it as leaves drift downstream. We must be remade, reborn, as Christ told Nicodemus. The years stiffen us. Disappointments calcify us. Pride armors us. To become like children again is to undergo the miracle of conversion, not a return to ignorance, but a return to receptivity. Grace does not erase the lessons of age, but baptizes them, making of the scar a testimony and of the burden a song. Picture the journey. A man grows up, builds walls, gathers possessions, learns suspicion. Then grace breaks in, like spring thawing the ice. Slowly the walls crumble, the hoard is opened, suspicion is replaced by trust. At last, when he kneels at the threshold of eternity, he is once more as he was at the beginning, only more so. He is childlike, but now consciously so, innocent, but now through redemption rather than ignorance. This is why heaven belongs to such as these. And what of us, here and now? We are summoned to begin this childlikeness even before the final dawn. We can, by grace, loosen our fists, open our imaginations, forgive our neighbors, confess our needs, and delight in the Father's gifts. Every act of trust, every prayer uttered in simplicity, every joy received without calculation is already a rehearsal for heaven. The kingdom does not only await, it breaks in wherever a childlike heart believes. So I urge you, do not despise smallness. Do not be ashamed of dependence. Do not sneer at wonder. These are the very treasures that outlast the world. In the Father's house, the halls are wide, but the doorway is low. Only those willing to stoop will enter. But once inside, they will find a table, a song, and a joy that no grown-up cynicism could ever imagine. The more I ponder the mystery of childlikeness, the more I see it as the golden thread running through all of Scripture. From the garden to the city of God, the story is one of sons and daughters learning again to live as children of the Father. Adam and Eve reached for the fruit precisely because they sought to graduate from dependence. They longed to be as gods, knowing good and evil by their own measure, and so they shattered the simplicity of trust. Redemption, then, is the long return, not backward into infancy, but forward into sanctified childhood, where trust is chosen, not merely assumed. Abraham is called the father of faith, but what is faith if not childlike trust? He left his country without a map, sustained only by a promise. The prophets, too, often stood like children against the wisdom of empires, proclaiming folly that proved true. Mary of Nazareth, when told she would bear the Christ, answered not with arguments, but with the obedience of a daughter, "Be it unto me according to thy word." And our Lord, placing a child in the midst of his disciples, pronounced that unless we become like this little one, we shall not enter the kingdom. The message resounds like a bell through the corridors of Revelation. Salvation is not achieved by becoming great, but by consenting to be small. Now imagine heaven itself as a school where the lessons are joy and love. What textbooks could be more suited to children than songs and stories, games and gardens? Perhaps that is why so many of our adult pursuits must be unlearned before we enter. The desire to dominate, the instinct to compare, the ceaseless keeping of scores, these have no place in the eternal playground of God. If you carry them with you, they will burn away at the threshold, for the city of light admits no shadows of pride. Yet the path toward childlikeness is not sentimental. It is not a matter of painting one's soul in pastel colors and pretending sorrows do not exist. Children weep after all, and their tears are real. But their tears, though real, are brief, and behind them is the stubborn refusal to despair. The child believes, against evidence, that comfort is near. The parent will come, the wound will heal, tomorrow will bring laughter again. To live as a Christian is to extend that instinct into eternity. To trust that even our deepest wounds will be healed in the hands of the Father, that tomorrow's dawn will rise not only over this earth, but over a new heaven and a new earth. We must remember, too, that childlikeness is not passivity, but participation. A child delights in the work of helping, even if his help is clumsy. He may carry wood that is too heavy or stir a batter too vigorously. Yet the parent smiles because the heart is willing. So it is with our service to God. Our prayers are faltering, our works imperfect, our understanding shallow. Yet He welcomes them, for we are His children, and love weighs the gift by the intention, not the polish. If you would therefore measure your progress in the spiritual life, do not ask only how much knowledge you have gained or how many victories you have won. Ask instead, have I grown more simple in trust, more quick to forgive, more ready to rejoice, more eager to serve, more willing to be led? If so, you are not descending into childishness, but ascending into true maturity, the maturity of childlikeness, which is the stature of Christ Himself. The saints of old give us luminous examples. Francis of Assisi sang with birds. Teresa of Avila laughed at herself in prayer, and countless others bore suffering with a courage that looked suspiciously like a child's bold confidence in his Father. They had unlearned the brittle postures of adulthood and rediscovered the freedom of being children of God. That is why their joy still startles us across centuries. It is the joy of eternity breaking into time. And so, the invitation stands. Will you risk being small? Will you dare to trust without proof, to forgive without guarantee, to delight without shame, to kneel without calculation? These are the tasks of the childlike heart, and they are also the keys to the kingdom. For in the end, heaven does not belong to the mighty, the learned, or the successful. It belongs to those who can still marvel at a sunrise, still whisper, Father, with trembling lips, still laugh even after tears. Heaven belongs to such as these, because heaven is, at its core, the Father's embrace, and only a child's heart can rest there. If we lean still further into this mystery, we see that childlikeness is not merely one quality among many in the Christian life. It is the very posture in which all virtues flourish. Humility, faith, hope, and love are not separate ornaments hung upon the soul. They are the natural growth of the heart that has dared to become small before God. A child does not calculate humility. He simply knows himself dependent. He does not construct elaborate arguments for hope. He simply assumes that dawn will come. He does not strategize about love. He simply clings to the hand that holds him. To live thus, with this unself-conscious reliance, is to live in the atmosphere of heaven, even while one walks on earth. And yet, how reluctant we are. We clutch our dignity, mistaking it for strength. We build elaborate defenses, afraid to admit weakness. We polish our reputations, fearing that to be seen as needy is to be seen as less. But in truth, we are already needy. Our breath is borrowed, our strength is finite, our wisdom a fragment. The childlike heart is not one that becomes needy, but one that admits what is already true. In doing so, it discovers that the Father has never withheld his hand, only that we have been too proud to grasp it. Consider how children look at the world. To them, every flower is an astonishment, every insect a wonder, every story a portal into mystery. Adults call this naivety. Scripture calls it vision. For in truth, the universe is astonishing. Every daisy is more intricate than a cathedral, every star a furnace beyond comprehension, every human soul a depth unfathomable. The childlike heart sees what is, while the realist sees only what is useful. Heaven will be unbearable to the utilitarian, for it is the place where usefulness ceases and only glory remains. And so we return again to that saying of our Lord. Unless you turn and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Notice that he says, turn. It is not a matter of drifting naturally toward childhood, but of conversion, of deliberate change. We must turn away from our idols of self-sufficiency, from our love of control, from our obsession with being admired. We must turn toward the Father, empty-handed, willing to be taught, willing to be led. This turning is costly, for it feels like surrender. But in truth, it is liberation. Imagine standing before the gates of heaven with hands full of trophies. They glitter, yes, but the doors will not open to burdened hands. Now imagine standing with hands empty, like a child eager to receive. The doors swing wide, for heaven is not purchased, it is given. And only the empty can be filled. This is why death itself, that last stripping away, may be a mercy. For in dying we lose our possessions, our plans, our titles, even our strength. What remains? Only the naked soul, childlike once more, lifted into the arm of God. Perhaps that is why saints have spoken of death not as defeat, but as birth, the final rebirth into the Father's house. And so, the journey of life is not to become great, but to become ready. Ready to kneel, ready to forgive, ready to laugh again, ready to marvel at a glory beyond telling. The world will call such readiness weakness. Heaven will call it citizenship. Therefore, my friends, if you would prepare for eternity, do not harden your heart with cynicism. Do not train your mind to sneer at beauty. Do not carry your grudges as if they were treasures. Instead, soften, release, forgive, rejoice. Learn again the alphabet of wonder. For the gates of heaven are low, and only the small may pass through. But beyond them lies a country where joy has no dusk, where love has no measure, and where every saint is forever a child at play in the garden of God. If I were to gather all these reflections into a single truth, it would be this. Heaven belongs to the childlike because heaven is the embrace of the Father, and only a child's heart can rest there. The proud, the self-sufficient, the calculating, they will find no foothold in that land, for its very air is grace, and grace cannot be earned. The citizens of paradise are not those who have conquered the world, but those who have allowed themselves to be conquered by love. Think of it. The saints are not remembered for their empires, but for their surrender. They laid down their weapons, their pride, their claims, and opened themselves to God as a child opens his hand to receive bread. And in doing so, they discovered that the universe was not against them but for them, that the Father's will was not a chain but a song. They entered the kingdom not with trumpets of self-congratulation, but with laughter that surprised even themselves. For at the center of all things, the mystery is joy, not the shallow merriment that evaporates at the first touch of sorrow, but the deep, resounding gladness that knows sorrow has not the final word. Joy is the note the universe was composed to sing, and only the childlike still have ears to hear it. They are not embarrassed to delight, not ashamed to weep, not afraid to trust. In their very openness, they reveal what we were always meant to be. Creatures leaning wholly upon the Creator, loved into being, and destined for glory. So let us, then, not be ashamed of smallness. Let us not despise the trembling prayer, the faltering song, the laugh that bursts forth even when the world is stern. These are not weaknesses to be outgrown. They are rehearsals for eternity. And when we forgive swiftly, trust simply, wonder freely, and love without calculation, we are already tasting heaven on earth. The final paradox is this. The childlike do not seek heaven as a prize. They stumble into it because they sought the Father. Their joy is not in possession, but in presence. And so, when the great gates open at last, it will not feel to them like a sudden surprise, but like a long-expected homecoming. The Father's house will not be alien, for they have been practicing its language all along, the language of trust, gratitude, wonder, and love. And now, I must leave you with this invitation. Do not think of childlikeness as an ornament to be added after you have achieved greatness. Think of it as the very soil in which greatness grows. Begin where you are. Thank Him for the gifts of this very hour. Forgive someone before the sun sets. Marvel at the sky as if you had never seen it before. In these small acts, you will find yourself becoming again the child you were always meant to be. And one day, when you hear the voice calling your name, you will run without fear into the everlasting arms, laughing as children do, because heaven belongs to such as these. If these words have touched your heart, I invite you to join this fellowship of reflection. Please like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, share it with others who may need its reminder, and subscribe to our channel so that together we may journey ever further into the wisdom of faith and the joy of childlike trust.